Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming out today to the Tower Center for our special event with our guest speaker, Brandon Valeriano. This is an exciting event, not only because the topic is fascinating and it's a wonderful presenter and a wonderful book that's coming out that we're going to talk about today, but this is the first, I think, the first official collaboration between the Tower Center and the Deason Institute for Cybersecurity, which is new here on campus. The first of many, I presume, with a lot of shared interest, and obviously cybersecurity is a hugely important issue for public policy, which is where the Tower Center focuses on. So it's great to collaborate with Deason and with Dr. Chang, and it's also great to kick off with our inaugural speaker, I suppose, Dr. Brandon Valeriano of the University of Glasgow. You should have his full bio in front of you, but I'd highlight just a couple of things about Brandon. He is a California native who now works full-time in Scotland. He's got research interest as broad as his geographic experiences. He writes on everything from the topic today, cybersecurity and conflict and peace and war in the international system, to the politics of international soccer. He's been very, very active writing about those issues. Fascinating stuff. So he's got a very, very fertile research program, and he's interested in a lot of interesting and important issues. He's also the author of two books, both forthcoming book. The first one is Russia's Coercive Diplomacy, Energy, Cyber, and Maritime Policy as New Sources of Power, which comes out next year, I believe. No, or later this year.
This month, yeah.
This month.
I got two this month. Two indexes at the same time.
All right, outstanding. So a book on Russia, because Russia's in the news now and again. And also the title of our talk, the book that inspired this talk, Cyber War versus Cyber Reality, Cyber Conflict in the International System, which comes out from Oxford University Press this month. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Brandon Valeriano.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It was good to stop off from Dallas. I haven't been in Texas for a while. I taught at Texas State University for a year and had to head to a conference in New Orleans. And it's just so tough to go 3 planes in one day and all that sort of stuff. So I was really happy to be able to stop here and kind of compose myself. I was looking at messages, someone from Australia talking about the problems at Dallas-Fort Worth and the airport, and I was so happy I got to stop, get some... had some fried steak today. Hopefully I'll make it through the talk, but God, it was so good. Brought back so many good memories. But today I'm going to talk basically about my book, Cyber War versus Cyber Realities. What I'm basically doing is looking at the dynamics of cyber conflict. And I was talking to Josh earlier today about the genesis of this project. But basically what happened is I understood that cyber was a new and important realm of international relations and conflict and military studies and all that. But a lot of my skepticism in some sense was about the inability of us to really articulate what the domain is, what really makes it up, and the context of this domain. And I thought we were really a bit stunted for knowledge in this area. So what I've basically done is transition from being a conflict studies, macro, international relations, kind of militarized interstate dispute guy, to leverage what I've learned through the entirety of my career towards focusing on this important and critical security question. And this is such an important and critical question because this domain could potentially change how we interact with other states. But for me, the question is about the shape of the domain, the nature of the domain, how we actually respond to these problems and threats. Because I think a lot of what we speak about in terms of cyber is about things in our imagination. The fears and things we don't necessarily understand. Because it's really tough to put so much of our life and so much of our control into digital devices. But this is the nature of technology and the nature of change. And I think a lot of us move forward with skepticism about the fears and the nature of our vulnerability in this system. But first I want to think about the shape of the domain. What is really happening? And for me, a lot of this will really tell us about what will happen in the future. I think really to understand the future and where we're going to go with these important policy concerns, we need to look at where we've been. And I think that's something we've really missed in this field. So that's generally been my hope as I've moved to do this research, to really scope out the shape of this domain. So this presentation here connects my various cyber conflict research projects to present a complete picture of the dynamics, theories, and scope of cyber operations. Basically, what my book does is, along with my co-author Ryan Manesh, we basically look at what people have said about cybersecurity and cyber conflict so far. We articulate a few theories about cybersecurity. We test those theories empirically, and then we use case studies to really dive deeper into our theories and also look a bit more onto non-state actors. And finally, we wrap it up by kind of adding the British sensibility that I picked up lately in terms of looking at norms and taboos and how things maybe ought to be, because I'm kind of concerned with the shape of the domain as it's kind of being articulated now. So for me, cyber operations, cyber crime, and other forms of cyber activities directed by one state against another are now considered part of the normal relation range of combat and conflict. The question, though, is, one, is this a new domain? And two, is this domain going to change how we interact in the international system? Is it going to change international relations? We need to understand the international relations context of cyber actions to understand the dynamics of cyber actions. It was really dumbfounding to me to really see the Sony dispute recently and the North Korea involvement. And a lot of people were skeptical that North Korea can be involved in this situation. One, because they thought North Korea was completely and utterly backwards. But two, they were basically pointing the finger on this idea of it being an insider threat, which is really kind of strange from the perspective of an international relations scholar when we know about North Korea. We've seen what North Korea has done before. We've seen their motivations. This wasn't surprising at all. But the other thing that's different about cyber relations is that almost anyone can almost kind of generate a cyber force. That you can put a lot of resources and put a lot of effort to developing this domain. But then the question would be, though, if we focus on this, if we develop a strong a cyber armed force, will this be used? And that's one of the other questions we have to really deal with and grapple with, because there's a lot of possible effects. You could talk about the expanding range of harm in cybersecurity. But the other thing is the context of international relations as it is now is very much restrained and muted. We can do almost anything we want to any country at this point in time. America is the most powerful state almost ever in the international system. But there are consequences to such action. There are consequences to the things that you can do in this international system. Even Putin, as far as we go in terms of painting him as this evil dictator, this like new Hitler sort of person, he even himself hasn't used cyber activities in Ukraine in these last 2 years, which is strange because they've used it before. So if Putin is restrained, if America is restrained, really what does that say about the scope and shape of the cyber domain? And if we find that the cyber domain is really restrained, really shows a bit of muted use of conflict and powers, that would really suggest to us that possibly focusing on the offense and not first on the defense and not first on resilience and not first on fighting against possibly cyber terrorists and cyber non-state actors and instead focusing on cyber states might lead us down the wrong path. So I think my work can possibly push us towards more considered policy judgments based on evidence. That's basically what I'm trying to do here with this work and this book. So I hope I make an impact for it. So rather than suggesting the nature of combat has changed, we're interested in examining if, how, and why it has changed. The shift towards the knowable rather than unknown knowns of the cyber domain is important in the scholarly discourse and perhaps lead to more proportional means of defense. I think that's really what I'm concerned with. The nature of defense, the nature of how we react to these threats. Because the entirety of my research career has basically been looking at escalation and conflict and power politics. And this idea that the best defense is the offense, which I find kind of strange and historically inaccurate. And I see us moving down the same path in the cyber field. So first, I will articulate the macro scope of the domain. I will look at the consequences of the use of cyber actions. And then I think today I'll probably skip this for time so we can have more time for questions. But I also look at norms and taboos, the critical dimensions, like I said, from the British sort of perspective. So I actually have this article kind of lined out. I got to start to work on this again, but I'm going to do this 10 facts about cyber conflict, which kind of outlines this talk. So you'll see these facts as I go along. But one, terminology is important. Cyber simply means computer or digital. A lot of people want to fight about the term cyber. I find these fights about terminology counterproductive. I think I just kind of want to move on and just dive into this idea of what actually we're talking about. Cyberspace is network system, microprocessors, mainframes, basic computers that interact at the digital level. But also we need to think a bit about the possibilities for the future. So it's not just computers. It's obviously our cell phones, watches. We'll probably have ear devices in the next 10 years. There's things we haven't even thought about. The focus, though, is basically on mainframes and microprocessors. That's really what the focus is. Our definition of cyber conflict, as opposed to this kind of overused term cyber attack, which I think the term cyber attack almost means literally nothing because there's millions of cyber attacks every day. We're looking at focused interactions. So cyber conflict is the use of computational technologies, defined as microprocessors or other associated technologies, in cyberspace for malevolent or destructive purposes in order to impact, change, or modify diplomatic or military interactions between entities. So really I'm focused on malevolence, destruction, and trying to modify behavior. Because that's what international relations is really about. It's about states trying to modify behavior. It's about leveraging power. It's about getting someone to do something they would otherwise probably not want to do. Now, this is a frame we're kind of diving into cyber from, though. We need to think about what are states doing with cyber? Where are they going with this? And how is cyber actually being used? Number two, we need theories. I'm not even sure I'm doing theory. I'm probably doing pre-theory from the kind of Rosenthal kind of perspective. But at least I'm trying something because I think we're wholly devoid of any sort of theory at all in the cybersecurity field. The basic idea of theory that a lot of people have suggested is this idea of sky is falling, the cyber world's going to change things. And my theory is a bit about cyber restraint, and I think states will be restrained in using cyber technology because, one, the reproducibility of the tactic. These are not one-shot weapons. Basically, you use them, they come out into the wild, and anyone can use them and reproduce them back at you. So there's a limited usability of these weapons. They're not something that is distinct in its domain. This is a problem, even say with Stuxnet. We use that against Iran to try and harm their nuclear system, and that gets out into the world, and other people can modify that code against us. So this is a problem. That's one reason why you would be restrained in using cyber technology, because someone can use it right back towards you. Weapons are complex. There's this idea that cyber weapons are easy, they're cheap. They're not. They're completely difficult. They take years. They take a lot of chance, a lot of coordination. This idea that code is easy is fairly ridiculous. I mean, almost anyone could do a DDoS attack. Almost anyone could flood a server with information requests. Anyone, you just think about your email inbox and just getting flooded and flooded. That can happen, but that happens. You set up filters to protect yourself and you move forward. Developing complex cyber weapons that have physical capabilities is wholly and utterly a difficult process. I'm reminded very much of I like the James Bond movie Skyfall because to me it's just hilarious from this perspective. I don't know if you guys remember this, but in Skyfall, MI6 or MI5, I forget which one, gets blown up with a cyber code, which to me is kind of like, I think you have some plumbing problems. It's not really a cyber thing. It's a design thing. It's this idea that these weapons are so easy and we can stop trains and bring down planes. Sure, these things are possible, but they're not easy. And we have this idea that these cyber weapons are so easy, and just think about how hard it is to figure out a new computer. Windows 8, oh my God, the world's falling apart. They have this idea that cyber weapons are easy, which is kind of baffling to me. Well, the deeper reason, though, I think there'll be restraint in cyber conflict is collateral damage. We're really concerned with collateral damage in international relations now. This is new, that you're not allowed to harm civilians. And the cyber domain is not distinct at all. It bleeds out to civilian space. There's no division between the military and the civilian space in cyber. And this is a problem from the attack. Because if you're willing to attack someone, there's going to be a problem in that you're likely going to harm civilian systems. So this will be another limitation in the use of cyber weapons. Obama, when he was going through and doing Stuxnet against Iran, kept asking the question, are we going to harm civilians? Are we going to hurt civilians? These are concerns that people have, and they have to deal with them given the way the system operates now. Maybe that'll change, but for right now, collateral damage is a huge concern. The other thing is diffusion. That cyber weapons can diffuse out, they'll spread out, you'll drag in allies, there'll be unintended consequences that you can't even think about disentangling. So cyber is so complex, it can bring in other actors, and this will be a problem. Now, basically the idea of us ever invoking Article 5 in NATO, a lot of people would suggest it probably would come from cyber. That a country will be attacked in the cyber realm, and that will invoke Article 5 for the first time. This world is so interconnected in terms of who are the allies, who are the friends. The cyber world is going to be problematic from that framework. Then the other thing is blowback. If cyber weapons are ever used, they will demand repercussions. They will demand a response. They will not kind of be allowed to go forward without a response. Even the Sony hack. Even with the U.S. government repeatedly warning Sony, telling them to fix their own network security, then them getting attacked, the U.S. government still responded to back up Sony, even though basically they should have cut their ties at that point. So there is this sort of repercussion issue. And then finally we have this norm violation thing too, where basically I would argue that cyber restraint has become a norm. That no one really wants to break that taboo, and the first one to break that taboo will feel the wrath of the international community, because this is the thing about cyber, that digital connectivity is become a sacred right. I was struck, I run the International Relations Master's Program, and I had a Nigerian student crying, not because they couldn't eat, not because they're being kicked out of the university, no, crying because they lost their internet connectivity and they couldn't talk home anymore. The government of Nigeria basically fell apart. They weren't paying tuition anymore. The University of Glasgow were not kicking them out, but what they did do is they cut off their internet. That was the worst thing that had ever happened to them. And I was kind of like, wait, you're still getting education. We need to think about how sacred and how important the internet has become to us. So to attack from that vector can be very problematic. So I think for a lot of reasons we'll see restraint. The other thing we're going to see is cyber regionalism. We talk about this idea of cyber conflict being global, being instantaneous. No, that's not really true. All the cyber conflicts I've found so far are basically literally connected to territorial disputes. They're connected to traditional international relations disputes. In many ways, cyber is a way to kind of display your dissatisfaction with conventional international affairs problems. So we talk about this sort of cyber domain as being new and different, when in reality, once you really dive down to the cyber things that we do see happen, they're not much different than the problems we've already had in the past. Even the Sony hack, North Korea, we've had these problems with North Korea for the last 70 years. It shouldn't be any different. It shouldn't be that surprising. It's only the nature of the attack that's different and surprising. Which then leads us to basically where we need to go now. That cyber isn't really an expansion of warfare. It's an expansion of espionage. It's an expansion of spying. It's an expansion of intelligence. It's an expansion of information gathering. So I think this is the sort of error that we've done so far, is we focus on cyber as being war. I don't even like the title of my book, but I don't decide my own titles. The marketing people do that. The future, I think, as I see it, is cyber espionage. That states are going to use cyber technology to try and balance against a rival, to try and catch up against a rival, to try and equalize the playing field, to cheat in some ways. That we basically restrict what China can get in the international marketplace. We restrict their research abilities, and one way they can catch up is to use cyber. So we need to really understand that. We need to understand how that will affect international relations. And I think we have a critical problem, as Josh would probably tell you, in the field of international relations in not being able to deal with intelligence and espionage. And I think this is something we need to think about in the future, not to kind of rush towards these frameworks of war, as sexy and interesting as they are, but to deal back with the espionage problem in cyber. And then finally, we will see proxy battles. We'll see cyber terrorism. We'll see states embolden proxy actors to fight their battles because of the attribution problem, as they say. That basically you can tell someone to do something, you can tell someone to fight your battles. The famous example is the Syrian Liberation Army, which is basically an Iranian force. You can do these things, you can hide behind these groups, but what effect will they really have? That I think that we'll see a lot of these proxy cyber terrorism battles, but I don't see them as being very impactful or being very useful, because they're not going to get the best of the best. The best of the best will remain within the state organizations. They'll remain within the state structures. So we'll see cyber terrorism, but how far will it go? What will it do? Will it shut down a bank for a day? Sure. Will it bring down a bank and destroy our digital infrastructure? No, of course not. So we need theories and data. So we need data. I'm an empiricist. I want data. I want to understand the world as it is and as we know it. So we had to go through and code cyber conflict, which I was told was impossible. And me being as dumb as I am, I just went ahead and did it. And it took us about 4 to 5 years to do this, but we finally got a good handle on all this. So we code things about types of disputes: vandalism, denial of service, intrusions, infiltrations. We code things like severity, so from minimal damage to a target attack on critical infrastructure, to a dramatic effect on a country's strategy, to all the way to escalated dramatic effect, which obviously hasn't happened so far. So we code these things. We code a lot more other interesting variables. But this is basically what we have now. And as I've said before, and I've said many times, I thought there would be a lot more. I thought the cyber domain, as important as it's supposed to be, as much as it shaped military infrastructure, as much as it shaped the national security infrastructure, we have seen very little cyber conflict between the states, which is basically surprising. And the majority of the cyber conflict we have seen has been very traditional, things that we would generally expect to see. India and Pakistan. I don't know, there's a pointer here. Yeah, India and Pakistan, North Korea, South Korea, Israel and Iran, China and Japan. These things that have been happening for the last 50 years. This is just a expansion in the range of interactions in the international system. We do see China attacking America quite a bit. Now we're seeing America go on the attack a bit more. So after 2011, once I update my data more, maybe America will be a bit more equal in terms of using more infiltration tactics to go back at China. For now, what we've seen is a lot of things of, like, say, China attacking America. But you wouldn't be really surprised by any of these interactions. Maybe the most surprising would be Russia and Estonia.
So Brandon, just sorry to jump in.
Sure.
It says average severity is 1.65. 1 was vandalism and 2 was denial of service?
Yeah.
Or was it?
No, it's right here.
Oh, down there, okay.
So it's 1.65 is the average severity between states. So basically it would fall between 1 and 3, which is what you would expect. But the idea is that cyber is so new, it's so different. It's it's changing how we do things, and once we really quantify it on a scale, you don't really see a lot. The other thing too would be, this is my perspective. This is the thing about data. We talk about data being biased. It's biased by the researcher. Sure, that's obvious. Like, no scientific scholar of international relations would dispute that point. This is my perspective. This is how I view the data. But this is the other thing about data. The data is a public good. I would hope other people, and I will probably see other people start to use this data and use it for their own ends. That maybe you can take all this and frame it in a way that would give the complete opposite of my talk. But I think for me, being intellectually honest, this is the talk I'm giving about the restrained nature of cyber conflict. It would be easier for me to go on the media and talk about, the cyber sky is falling. I don't get quoted in the media quite a bit because basically I say the boring things that they don't want to hear. But this is what we have. This is the shape of cyber conflict. We have seen there are 126 active rivals. So that basically means these states are fighting militarized, threatening disputes between each other. They're active, they hate each other, they're willing to go to war at almost any time. We've only seen 20 of 126 actually engage in cyber conflict. Average severity is 1.65 out of 5, but really it should be 1.65 out of 3. We have seen 111 incidents and 45 disputes. Disputes are coordinated structures of attack. So like America had the attack against Iran, which is called Olympic Games, which includes Stuxnet, Flame, Dooku, all these other sorts of attacks. Those are aggregated into macro disputes. The incidents are kind of more individual level disputes. So there's different ways we can kind of look at the data. So we have this for people to look at to kind of see the shape of the domain. Foreign Affairs made this for me, so this kind of shows who's using it. China's using it very much as the initiator. America's a target because America obviously is the put upon state in the international system, the weak targeted state. But that just shows the data in a different way.
I have a clarifying
Sure.
question. How do non-state actors and attacks fit into this? Did you ascribe them to a state if they were targeting another state, or
non-state actors fit in if they're an important, I forget what the term is, but if they're an important actor for national security, if they're the target. We cannot fit in non-state actors as the attacker. because that would be impossible to basically code, because I wouldn't know where to start, basically. Because states, we have a list of states, I have a list of rivals, I have a list of people that hate each other. We focus our search that way.
Okay.
To look at non-state actors would be kind of, I don't know where to begin. But where we do cover it is in the book and case studies.
Okay.
So we break down the case studies, we do the Syrian Liberation Army, we do like 2 other case studies. So that's the best way we can go about doing it. It would be kind of really, really tough to code this from a non-state actor perspective. But that's the other thing too, is we haven't seen non-state actors be very successful. Anonymous was attacking, who were they attacking recently? Was it
ISIS.
ISIS. They were going after ISIS, and everyone's like, oh my god, Anonymous they're going on the offense, they're doing this. And they were just taking down Twitter sites, even Twitter handles, which, ISIS could just make another one. They're not really actually doing anything of use, really. So this is the thing, that states are the ones that have the resources. States are the ones that have the money to do these things that can really, really affect how people live. The other thing, too, is this idea of like a cyber hacker, in the basement of their mom's garage with Mountain Dew, just sitting there, the kind of Matthew Broderick war game sort of idea. And maybe you'll see those people every once in a while, but they want pensions, they want jobs. The black hat hackers, they almost always become white hat hackers at some point. They get co-opted by governments. These things always happen. Every famous hacker at some point in time ends up going to jail and then working for government. That's kind of the story. So this idea of these lone hackers who are changing the world, through their technology and their bunkers, and it's a bit ridiculous too. So non-state actors are important, but it's really states that worry me here. So that's the focus.
Thank you.
So we haven't seen a lot of high severity actions. These are the biggest high severity actions we've seen so far. So we have Olympic Games, we have Stuxnet, which I have a whole chapter on Stuxnet. And when we break down Stuxnet, the problem is that basically Iran actually increased centrifuge production. The goal of Stuxnet was to degrade Iran's nuclear capabilities and ability to enrich uranium. Everyone agrees actually that all they basically did is bring more centrifuges online. So even if America was able to physically damage centrifuges in Iran in the middle of nowhere and break in and do all these things, it really didn't change much because it just brought more systems online. The other problem is America brought down 11% of Iran's centrifuges. The centrifuges were called the Pintos of the nuclear game. They had a 10% fail rate. So we're not even sure this 11% is any different from 10% fail rate that naturally happens anyways. So, we talk about Stuxnet being this like changing the world example, but when you really dive in, when you really do the research, you see, yes, it's possible to damage things physically with cyber, but we were attacking the weakest, the worst, the kind of most problematic system. It was tough to get in there, but really what was the impact? So we don't see a lot of impact in cyber so far. Maybe in the future we will, but as far as it goes now, you don't really see too much. And the thing I always like to talk about too is this idea, like when we killed bin Laden, we had one of these new stealth helicopters that got shot down, that kind of hit power lines, we had to blow it up. The Pakistanis immediately sold it to the Chinese. What probably hurt American national security more? The secret black helicopter the Pakistanis sold to the Chinese, or what China is stealing from American sort of jet technology? I'm not really sure, but I would probably guess that things like physically taking that helicopter or taking that spy plane a few years ago, that those probably gave them more actionable intelligence than blueprints and plans. So to me, that's where I see these things right now, that I don't see a lot of severe actions. Most attacks are regional. So when you map out the Middle East, it looks like a traditional Middle East map where, Iran's attacking Israel, Iraq is attacking Kuwait, Syria is involved, it's nothing really different. The only one that would be different would basically be China attacking America, so America's not really supposed to be on the map there. It should be all the way over there. But everything else kind of fits with the sort of how things are going now. A lot of Southeast Asian sort of territorial disputes. So cyber, to me, if you look at it on the map, it's not this sort of global conflict. It's this sort of return to the normal in some ways, just with different tactics. Middle East, India, and Pakistan shouldn't be surprising at all. Numbers, data. So the other question I had, though, was about the impact. We wanted to look at the foreign policy impact because people are saying, well, this is changing foreign policy. This is changing how people interact. you don't really need to understand the numbers. But basically what we're doing here, dependent variable is conflict cooperation. So this would be events data. So for the last 50 years in international relations, we've been doing events data. And what it looks at is a scale of 10 to positive to 10 negative. And it looks at newspaper clippings, and it looks at sentiment between states. And it looks to see if the sentiment is positive or negative. So that's our dependent variable. We plug in cyber incidents as the independent variable and look to see if relations between nations change as a response to cyber incidents. And what we find here, we say this in political science, we're stargazing. We're looking for stars because stars denote statistical significance, which would suggest that these things are not random. So basically, one way you can interpret all these numbers here is basically to say that there is no significant impact between states at the conflict and cooperation level, except for two things. When a state will use a DDoS attack to attack another state, that degrades relations. Or when a state tries to change the behavior of another state with cyber operations, that will degrade relations. But disruptions, theft, high severity, low severity, intrusions, infiltrations, vandalism, defensive attacks, offensive attacks, private attacks, who the target is, none of it changes relations between states at all. Which is funny why DDoS does, because DDoS is the least you can do. Basically, everyone right here could probably learn to do a DDoS attack within 10 minutes. Actually, probably every one of your laptops is probably doing a DDoS attack right now, because you have all those things. You have all those things your computer is doing that you don't know why it's doing it. Malware and things like that. It's just being used for these sorts of things. DDoS is nothing. DDoS can be changed. DDoS is insignificant. But when you can't get into a web page, when you're playing Stony PlayStation and you can't play online for 4 months, that hurts. So that probably does demand a bit of a response. Behavior change probably demands a bit of a response. So this is the impact of cyber, which isn't really there so far. Another way to look at it is we break it down by states. What I like about this one is kind of funny here is when China attacks America, American relations with China actually get more positive, which is counterintuitive. You would think, well, America would get pissed off. Well, actually, if you look at the news, you look at after these attacks, America talks about norms. They talk about institutions. They talk about we must both work together to stop these cyber attacks. They don't actually get angry. The worst America did is indict 10 lieutenants, which is almost literally the least you can do, because we're not indicting generals. We're not indicting people who are actually organizing these operations. We're indicting lieutenants. So when you break it down this way, you see some negative effects. Of course, when Iran's attack, they get pissed off. Syria, America would get pissed off if Syria were to attack America. But there's interesting things here, like U.S. and China. U.S. actually gets more positive. So this is the thing. I don't think we have a real handle on what happens between states when cyber incidents do occur. So this is another way of breaking out this question of impact and what happens between states when they use cyber. As I said before, most of the incidents are espionage. And here we have 24% of the, it's 107, we changed to 111. But the earlier version of this run of the data is that a lot of these attacks are just espionage informational attacks. So if we're going to see cyber change the world, change the expanding range of harm, change how we fight military battles, when you actually dive in, you really see that a lot of these things are just basically informational attacks. So this is the thing. This isn't the sort of changing the world revolution hypothesis. Really what we're just seeing is espionage. And I think we need to deal with cyber on the terms of espionage, not on the terms of warfare. Cyber terrorism. These are the cyber terrorist incidents we have in our data set, so they're connected to the states in some way. But they're all ones. They're all very, very minimal. Very often they're DDoS attacks, often they're web page hacks. I have a case study in my book. I was talking about cyber Gaza, and there was this idea that the new way to fight the intifada would be on the digital battlefield. That this would change how Israel and Palestine interact. And I asked my friends about this, and like, oh yeah, this is the new battlefield. Everything's changing. You want to write about it, sure. And I dived into it, and basically I found that the Israeli vice president, the background of their Facebook page got hacked and changed to pro-Palestinian. and the Philippine embassy, the Israeli embassy in the Philippines went down. The webpage. That's all that happened. There were millions and millions of attacks. Palestine was focused on bringing down Israel from this area, and nothing happened at all, really. And this was the talk in D.C. that this was changing. And I asked my friends in Israel, what's going on? They didn't even notice anything. So, I think we overinflate this quite a bit. We don't see a lot. Which leads to, where do we go? And this is why I'm focused on proportional means of defense. The first thing we need to do is shore up our defenses. We need to think about cyber hygiene. Peter Singer, in his book on cyber conflict, has this great example where a general asked for a password of one number. He said he couldn't be bothered to learn more numbers than that. And you see this all the time. The FBI told us once about a bank that got hacked because basically someone got phished through email. So the guy is on the golf course with his BlackBerry, gets phished through email asking for information, and calls his secretary to give an answer to that email to give away all his passwords. And it's just, if that's what's going to happen, we really first need to focus on home. The target is almost as much responsible as the attacker. A state can only steal what it allows to be stolen. So we really need to think about, how are we protecting ourselves? Everyone was shocked when the Sony thing happened. But Sony was hacked in 2011 before. And Sony was repeatedly warned. We should not have been as surprised. Especially if they're going to pick on Kim Jong-un. His father used to kidnap people in Japan to make movies, for God's sakes. And we're surprised that they would hack into Sony because they made this movie where they blow up Kim Jong-un's head? Of course it's going to happen. We are not prepared for the defense. We cannot move to the offense unless we first worry about the defense. So this leads to some responsibility being located within the target. States need to be concerned with cyber hygiene. They need to be concerned with proper online usage. One of my other favorite stories in the book is Flambe, where basically what happened is some pretty girl was making a Facebook account and was friending everyone in Sarkozy's government. And then they posted like a car ad, a Word document car ad that had macros embedded in it. And someone clicked on it, and next thing you know, the hackers are deep in the Sarkozy government. But why? Because these idiots are just clicking on any Facebook account because it's got a pretty girl on there. It's just, we need to think about what we're doing and how we protect ourselves. We're rushing to the offense. We're rushing to the military, and we're not shoring up our defenses first. We need to update our software. How often do you go to Windows Update and hit update all critical infrastructure, all critical updates? We don't do it very often. We need to work with white hat hackers. There's all these stories in the cyber domain about basically benevolent hackers telling companies about zero-day exploits, and the companies just not being able to either deal with all that information or not recognizing the importance of that information. We need to think about how we protect ourselves first before we go on the offense. So I think there is a taboo developing that we're really kind of, in many ways, afraid to go on the offense. But I'm worried about where we're going to go in the future. So what's next? The response to cybersecurity issues is important, and so far the response has generally been to prepare for the offense. I think that is wrong. The problem is that as a society, our reactions to threats must provide a path towards limiting freedoms we have on the internet and restricting the development of research, and also provoking escalatory responses in other states as they buy into the cyber hype. This is the problem, that we need to worry about what we're doing if we militarize the cyber domain. That cyber connectivity is useful for education. It's useful for commerce. It's useful for research. It's useful for a lot of things. Why are we going to rush to militarize this domain first? That's the real tragedy here, that if we make this part of the military, if we make this part of the threat vectors that we worry about, what will happen to the benefits that we've kind of developed from the internet? The internet's been the greatest thing we've ever done to change our lives in our generation, in our lifetime. And if we securitize it, as they would say in Britain, we are limiting a lot of the possible good things that can come out of this domain. So what do we need to do more? Right now I'm really focused on collecting more data. So I want to go from 2000 to 2015 to collect data on all states, to expand our data on non-state actors, to backfill our data, to do narratives, to look at capabilities is really a key issue. I want to look at cyber power and how that's used, and if it's useful for coercion. But also we need to think more about sharing information between the private and the government sectors. That's been a real limitation. We need more data, we need more training, we need more social science. We need to focus away from the hype. And as always, I like to end all talks now. I just decided to end all talks now with puppies. So we need our little security puppy. We need to protect ourselves. We need to think about the home. We need to think about what we're doing to shore up our own defenses. Because of course cyber attacks are ahead. Of course we're going to see cyber conflict. I think it'll be muted, and in many ways it can be prevented by focusing first on the defense as opposed to the offense. So that's my story. That's what I think about cybersecurity so far.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. We are happy to open it up to questions. Sandy, please.
I have one question and one comment. The question is this. You're talking about security, but I'm interested in how you define that, because, for instance, you talked about espionage. Does that include industrial espionage? Does it include it only if it's, say, industrial espionage against Lockheed or a military-related target? My comment is that I don't think your model works for other areas of international relations where cybercrime is prominent. Mm-hmm. As a publisher, I can confidently predict that your book is going to appear on various pirate sites within 2 weeks after its publication. The norms there actually, don't provide any constraint whatsoever, because there's a strong information wants to be free movement internationally. The famous site in Sweden, Pirate Bay, is actually supported by a political party called the Pirate Party. So, there's actually political support for this in our own Congress, for instance. And I would also give you an example of how states can act in interesting ways to make this less of a problem. In China, as you probably know, piracy of CDs, music has been rampant for a long, long time. But it's beginning to change because there are many more movie theaters now that have sprung up, and the state owns most of those movie theaters, so it now has an interest in suppressing music piracy. So internally, its own domestic policy changes, and that impacts what it does, to tamp down the international piracy that, people in the country have engaged.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. I think one thing there would be we need to focus on how to build institutions. And if we're thinking about building cyber institutions, we need to look at responsibility. And that would be basically making states responsible for the things their citizens do. If we're worried about cyber terrorism and cyber crime, this is what we're seeing like in Russia, where now you have to use basically a passport to get online. So in that way, that we actually know that there's some responsibility there. So I think there's a hope for the future in terms of institution building. I think that's the way to kind of focus it is, if something bad happens from your territory, because as much as cyber is digital and global, it still needs to start from somewhere, that we need to focus on responsibility within a state. Now, yes, my book will be pirated, and I hope it is. I want it to be read. I'm not going to make much money on this, and I want Oxford to make money on this because they do all the rest of my books, but I'd rather be read. That's the thing. But luckily, actually, it's hardback for $23 on Amazon, so, it's just $23.
Christmas is coming.
Yeah, if you could throw me $23 on Amazon to make Oxford happy, I'd be really happy with that. As far as cyber crime, though, I was talking about this at lunch, too, and this is something I really need to do. I used to work at Office Depot and Staples, which actually, this is why I like the kind of the people who come from the lower classes go into academia, because we have some work experience. And when I used to work at Office Depot, basically what we did is we assumed shrinkage. And shrinkage is this idea that by volume you will assume losses. Because you have these huge stores, you can't police them, you can't have your personnel tackling someone who steals a printer. That would just be dumb. So we assume a certain amount of loss by volume. And I think the problem in cybercrime and in the cybersecurity domain, which I'll write at this on some point, is that basically we need to look at the expanded range of digital commerce that's allowed by cyber, and then think about losses from that framework. We think about losses as, oh my God, this is horrible, but think about all the opportunities we get from this framework. And the other thing we had at Office Depot is we had the cage. which basically we locked up things that were really, really valuable and really, really small and hard, easy to steal. And we don't do that often. That we need to think about Lockheed. We need to think about our critical infrastructure. And we need to cage it and we need to protect it. But people don't want to shore up critical infrastructure because it's difficult. Because how do you redo all these systems? How do you redo all these computer systems from the 80s? That's a horrible, horrible problem to tackle. How do you restart a nuclear dam? Things like that. I don't know. You can't just turn it off, reinstall the software, and restart it. It doesn't work like that. So these are the problems that people don't want to deal with because they're so difficult. We instead are focused on the air-sea battle doctrine and attacking China and not making sure the Hoover Dam is going to work if, like, the DOS software from 1985 doesn't work anymore. You got to think about, say, like Windows XP. Windows stopped supporting XP, and then what? Like 90% of the computers in the world use XP. And if that isn't supported in terms of security, what are the consequences of that? And all we need to do is really just update our operating systems, but people don't want to do that because they don't like change. So there's a lot there. This is why I love cybersecurity, because it's such a wide open landscape. It's like the Wild West of academia, where people are basically saying anything and everything they want to. And I hope more and more smart people dive into this area because we really, really need it. I'm a bit of a skeptic, but I think I'm skeptic in terms of this war frame. I'm not skeptical in terms of how cyber will change our future. It's obviously changed our future. I'm just concerned with this idea of a cyber war. I think it's a bit overstated.
Oh, you want to jump in?
So let me ask you a related question as you talk about critical infrastructure. So let's see, I guess it was about April of 2013. There was a physical attack on the Metcalf power station in San Jose. I guess.
Were they shot at?
Yeah, a couple miles from Facebook and all the tech companies. And basically, they, it was a pretty substantial attack. It was physical. They cut some optical cables and stuff. But the PG&E was able to reroute power and stuff. So basically, nothing went down. But there was a pretty serious conversation about SCADA systems and critical infrastructure. And give us your comments about that. Could there be something sort of discontinuous where suddenly, if there isn't the necessary cyber hygiene, kind of as you were talking about, the systems based on DOS and Fortran, years ago, talk about risk there.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. We're aware of the risk. We're just not necessarily willing to change things based on the risk. And, that's a straight speculation because if these things are so critical and so important to our national security, why are we focused on the military and not focused on the things civilians use? I think that's the thing we need to really start to talk about. I think one of the things that's happened is the cyber community has basically been taken up by the military because they're in search of a mission. They lost their mission after Iraq and Afghanistan, that we can't go and attack nations and rebuild them. That's just clearly almost utterly impossible. So then what does the military do now? Cyber. We have a cyber fleet. We do all this. And we throw our money on that. We have a cyber command. But we don't have a cyber critical infrastructure command. And that's the thing. That's the less sexy story. And we need to think about how we frame this and how we kind of leverage our ideas, because there's a lot of research we have about risk and about payoffs and about expected utility and returns and the vulnerabilities we have, and we're not talking about that at all. And that's a huge problem. We've spent all this time talking about a cyber revolution and not enough time talking about what we need to do to change our system to protect ourselves at the basic level. I think that's the key thing. I like the way the Germans talk about these things in terms of resilience. I also like the way the Brazilians talk about these things in terms of basically leaving the cyber for education and research. That's their strategy. It's not the military's education and research. And I think that's where we need to go. But instead we talk about threats. Instead we talk about Sony. And Sony is not a critical infrastructure. As much as I wanted to see the interview, it's not going to change my life if I don't see the interview. But if a cyber attack is going to harm our water systems and things like that, that is something we really need to worry about. And it's something we're not talking about. And it's something, there's another problem is that basically private industry doesn't want to share information. And one of the reasons why is because there's a lack of trust in government. And we need to restore confidence and trust in government systems and how it cooperates with civilian infrastructure. But instead, we're focused on the military. So I guess that's one of the things I've been kind of trying to do with this project is to kind of talk about how almost insane it is to focus on this from the military and then to move to crime and espionage and all these other more important projects. And hopefully other people will do them too. And I think that's where we need to push people to do these things, because there's a lot of things that people want to talk about in cyber, but there's a lot of things that people need to talk about in cyber, and we're just not doing that. So in some ways I'm trying to evangelize and say, do this work, because there's so much stuff that needs to be done. And the other sort of perspective too is we talk about these things in academia. What are we doing? Does it matter? Does it actually change society? And this stuff, it does. It has a deep impact on society. I actually feel like I'm doing something useful instead of coding the 88th iteration of the militarized interstate dispute data set. Like this stuff is useful, it's fun, it's important. And it gets me invited to U.S. government and the UK government. This stuff has never happened before. And I encourage others to do the same thing.
And more importantly, SMU. So I had
Phil
Paul,
Knapp too.
Paul A.V.
Well, thank you. Very much enjoyed the talk, and I'll be sure to buy the legitimate version, pirated version. Mostly because I don't know where to go for pirated books.
Russian websites.
Russian. Yeah, I think I should just stay clear of those. I have two questions, and one research design and one sort of conceptual. One, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you constructed the universe of cases of these attacks. What was the sources you used for that? And if there's any, I can imagine a skeptic at some point saying, well, you may have missed a number of cases. How do we know that this is an accurate picture of cyber attacks? And two, if you can talk a little bit more about this taboo concept, because it seemed like a lot of the talk was, it's really hard to do these things, and there's not a lot of benefits, and there's deterrence because someone might strike you back, and there's blowback. So is it a taboo, or there's just not a lot of utility in a lot of ways? And so it's not a taboo, it's just self-restraint because there's not the benefits there.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I would disconnect that idea. Like, let's say there's a chemical weapons taboo. There's a chemical weapons taboo because there's not a lot of the utility in using chemical weapons because they're not really effective on the battlefield. So I think that's why. I mean, I'm going to use the term taboo from the British normative sense, but I'm going to use it as an American who connects it back to payoffs. So that's how I would apply it, basically, because I don't think it works from the payoff perspective. Now, the data set, the cases. So how do you code this stuff? That was always a thing. You can't code cyber. It's secret. No one wants to talk about it, all this other stuff. Well, one, everyone's been very, very willing to talk about this because they're scoping out the domain. They're trying to justify their importance. So there's a lot more information about cyber attacks out there than you would expect to find. More importantly, too, cybersecurity firms have been our godsend. Why? Because all they basically do is talk about how good they are at stopping these attacks and releasing these reports, and that's basically the foundation of what we do. Because basically what we would do is we use news and Google searches to find where these attacks are and who's using them and who's going against whom, and then we dive in and get the details with the computer security firm reports. So that's been very, very useful from this idea of the perspective that, we might miss a lot of attacks. Sure. But that's the other thing, too. If we miss any attacks, that basically means we don't know about it. Then it gets to the whole tree falling in the woods thing. If we're talking about foreign policy and effects between states and no one knows it's happened, then does it really exactly matter? But the other thing, too, about data sets, I have to reiterate over and over again, data sets are always a work in progress. So this is version 1.0. Version 2.0 will be more intense, will be more detailed, and then possibly by version 5, we'll have non-state actors and everything we have in there. But luckily, so far, people have been very, very willing to talk. And I've gone through a lot of iterations of this data where people have been checking it and going over, because I assume it's about peer review, but people always like to talk about, well, you have 200 cases, but I know about this one case because I'm Turkish, and they'll tell you about the case, and they'll make you add in there, like, I have like the Estonian cases in here. Estonia is not a rival with Russia because Estonia basically has no military, so it can't really be a rival with Russia, but it's in there because peer review people kept making me put it in there. So I've been helped by the peanut gallery, as I say. So yeah, there's been a lot more information in there that I thought I would just do case studies, and I kept finding that I could actually code this, so we did. And then one day I ended up at the CIA, and I was dead scared because I assumed the CIA had their own data set, and they don't. They were actually using mine. So, I mean, they have data, but it's basically country specific. So they don't put it together, and that's what I do. I think about things. I'm a generalist. I do everything. I'm working on video games now, so I want to think about general processes. So that's how I was able to tie it all together. So I'll probably be at Langley a lot more lately in the future.
So I had Haruki next.
My question is based on the Sony's case, first, U.S. government announced that we are sure that it was attacked by North Korea, and then a few days later, it was announced that the U.S. was hacking North Korea. And when I heard that news, and I felt that the original announcement of the U.S. government of that it was from North Korea was more credible, because if the U.S. has already hacked the North Korean computer, then U.S. would more easily figure out it comes from the North Korea. My question is whether and how hacking potential attacker is helpful to prevent cyber attack.
Okay, so the problem there, so what you're talking about basically is that America infiltrated North Korea's networks. So that's how we basically knew that North Korea did this. The problem with that is, and the problem with our intelligence services, is they have problems, I'm sure Josh will tell you, about putting the dots together. So while we knew they were doing these things, we didn't know about the total operation. So that's why it probably couldn't warn Sony. The other problem with warning Sony is that basically if the U.S. government had warned Sony beforehand, it would basically let people know what we're capable of. So this is the other thing with intelligence and preemptively hacking someone, is that by telling people what you're capable of, you then limit your capabilities. And this is one of the weird things about this, is that basically the U.S. government came out and they gave a speech of Fordham and they just basically said, okay, we're tired of all you people telling us that we don't know North Korea did it. We do, and this is why. And that was a strange thing that happened, because basically they were tired of people just making fun of them for going out and attributing the case to North Korea very, very quickly. So it was a strange thing that they came out and did this. But this is how we need to think about these things. That there's a great piece by John Lindsay and Eric Gartsky where they talk about the thing that cyber could be useful for is deception and honeypots. And this is really another thing we need to talk about, is cyber repression. That people have this idea that we can protest, that we can use cyber technology to increase the ability of states to protest, of individuals to protest against governments. It's not true. Actually, cyber actually helps states repress individuals more. So this is the problem, is that basically like the Tahrir Square, Egypt, they were trying to organize this on Facebook, and of course they all got arrested because it was on Facebook. The Tahrir Square protest that worked was by flyers and old traditional methods. So in many ways, cyber is better for deception. It's better for traps. But if the entire basic kind of blogosphere is just saying the U.S. government doesn't know what it's doing with the Sony hack, it kind of provoked the U.S. government to come out and tell them exactly what they were doing. I wrote a piece on Slate before the U.S. government came out and said, of course Sony did this. I don't know. I mean, of course North Korea did this. I don't know who else would do it. And I didn't realize what happens when someone who has over 1 million Twitter followers retweets what you do. Because, oh my God, my Facebook feed and my Twitter was just full of all these crazy people telling me, like, I don't know what I'm talking about. The U.S. government doesn't understand it. I'm sure the U.S. government knows what they're doing in terms of this. But there's a cost to giving away this information. And there's a cost to this information because it's probably more problematic in some ways for organizing protests and organizing the future. And I think we need to worry about that cyber repression is a real problem, and that's a real fear I have with states in the future. But no one's really working on that much. So I think that's what we need to focus on, digital repression, digital organizations, things like that. Positive protests using digital technology.
General Williams?
Yeah, I want to go back to something you talked about a little bit in cybercrime, and maybe that's your 2.0 or 3.0, but I think when you look at the cyber world, I mean, essentially, it is just another means, another highway. Mm-hmm. And for the cyber criminal, you made a good point about the behavior of the users. If you take your mobile devices, every mobile device is probably the most vulnerable thing that you use today. And but the average student, and I'm sure the average digital native that's coming up now is going, well, this is what we want to do. But at the same time, they don't understand the vulnerability. So the motivation of the cyber criminal may be just your average criminal that just happens to use a cyber means to do what they want to do. And that typically is what seems to happen. In fact, when you talk about infrastructure attacks, and some of them you don't know about, but the ones that have been applied against infrastructure, like electrical grids, they may not be state actors, but they may be somebody that might be essentially a ransom person. I'm going to hit you with crypto locker, and then maybe when you pay me, I'll release your database, and you can go function again. And we have one here local. I won't mention it because some of these people probably use their power system. But at the end of the day, that was a real problem. There was great panic in that organization, and unfortunately, because they had not done a backup, we couldn't help them, to bring everything back up. So essentially, they had to pay the ransom. Now, of course, they have backups now, but it's a behavior problem. And I think you're exactly right. I think when the actors in the system think that everything is free for all and it's free, that they don't have to change their behavior because I want to talk to my friend, I want to flatten out my communications, and I think the last point you made about the suppression, which essentially is a free speech argument, is really one you do have to worry about. Now, the question is, will the political fathers that be, regardless of the country, if they don't want you to say something, then maybe that will be their way to control your ability. And Egypt's a good example. Suppression there, suppression in Libya, suppression in Iraq, Iran.
I think you're exactly right there, too. And I think one of the things we need to think about, too, is this is why this is in politics. Because there is a political objective for almost everything that happens in cyber. Even with the ransomware things. There's a goal there, money. People seem to have this idea that there's like cyber anarchists, like the Javier Bardem character in Skyfall. No, it doesn't work like that. They actually literally have clear objectives. North Korea just wanted that stupid movie to go away, which was a stupid movie, but it's a funny movie. It's like, we don't think about the political objectives. We don't think about the ends that they're trying to achieve. And if we know what the ends are, we can protect ourselves. But going back to the military, though, the thing that scares me there, the two things that scare me, is we don't think about how these digital connectivity things make us more vulnerable. That's the Snowden thing. So Snowden to me was scary, not because of what he was doing or what the U.S. government was doing, but basically we were just collecting all this information, just leaving it somewhere. And anyone could get to that. Anyone could hack into that. So you put it out there, you collect it, then we become more vulnerable for that thing, from that perspective. But the other thing that scares me is like when you play these first-person shooters, you have the heads-up display, and you know where all your allies are, where everyone is, all the map sort of things. We're developing that now. The U.S. government and DARPA is, and they're doing it with cell phones. And they're doing the mapping things with a cell phone, and all your unit will be there, and all the enemy will be there, and that's great. Anyone can log in with their cell phone on the battlefield. That sounds great from the user perspective, but then you got to think about, wait, we're becoming more vulnerable because we do that. That's the whole thing. The story of Iraq and drones is that we weren't encrypting the feeds on the drones, and they're like, oh, the drones are getting hacked. Like, no, you didn't even encrypt it in the first place. So we don't think about how we make ourselves more vulnerable with this technology. We think about how we can use these technologies to make us more effective, but we don't think about how the things we do to make ourselves more effective actually make ourselves more vulnerable. And that's a key problem, because we're not deducing out these ends of these strategic problems. We're just thinking about possibilities. I mean, you think about possibilities, that's a huge problem.
I want to follow up on one point that you said, and it's essentially the military argument. I would tell you, as a military guy, I don't think it was the military's objective to sort of run that space. I think it was the politicians' objective to run the space. And they went, we'll give it to the military because the military has capabilities. Whether you want to use it as an attack weapon, that's one thing. But the other part of it is, it goes back to the political realm. What is the political intent that is going to be applied across the spectrum of the cyberspace, whether it's us or whether it's somebody else. And so I think I would take a step back and say, well, the military has capability, but the military doesn't necessarily want to use cyber as, its world, its control. I mean, DARPA gets it because as a advanced research project agency, that's where, the internet came from. So, that was the driver. And I think they'll continue to be the driver if that's the only thing society wants. So, I think you have to have another argument somewhere, with the people in business or in academia, where do we go next? And who really wants to control this?
Yeah, we don't ask these hard questions. We rush for these technologies, and we don't think about the consequences. And if I was in the military, I would kick the cyber can down the street and get away from it as much as possible. But they all want it, and I wouldn't want it. I wouldn't want to deal with it. But they're going to have to now.
I would tell you the Air Force wants it because they're not going to have pilots, so they need something.
So next I have Winston Sure.
Okay, I have one comment and one question. The comment is the problem you mentioned earlier, that this technology makes us more vulnerable. Like say that the user experience on battlefield, and my comment is those vulnerabilities can be improved, can be solved, right? By, let's say, the NATO has been using Link 16 or whatever to communicate on the battlefield on an instant basis, and I didn't hear a Link 16 has been cracked or anything. And my question is what's the process? How is the origin of attacker defined? Because as your slides showed, the DDoS attack is the only attack that has significant behavioral change effect, right? And
No, those are two separate things. DDoS and behavior change.
Okay, I'm going to build on that. And according to my amateur computer science knowledge, I can grab a computer here in Dallas and then capture a few bunch of random computers in China, and then let them send some wonderful, garbage emails to flood some websites in the States, and that make up a DDoS attack, right? So my question is the origin of attack defined? Say those computers initiating those wonderful random emails, or we can trace back to me, or let's say even somebody else in Russia or Germany is using my computer to capture the computers in China.
Yeah, it's a non-technical method of basically just looking at where is the operation originating from based on the political objective, based on the origins of the operation, like where Stuxnet was origin from American government, Olympic Games. They had the whole total sort of a strategy to deal with this problem, and they do this, and that. So that's how we're doing it. We're not doing it based on the technical idea of where physically is the DDoS coming from. I want to look more at DDoS and look at that information, but as as you're talking, it's just the problem of attribution in DDoS is almost impossible. So that information is basically just noise in many ways. So instead of just looking at network traffic data, we look at the the political operations data. So that's how we're coding it basically. But the other thing too is like what I want to do in the future is, all this is free, all this out there on the internet. But what we're basically going to do is, we have like 111 incidents. Probably the next round we'll have 250 incidents. I want it connected to basically have its own web page, have its own sources. I want people to dive in and do things on their own and kind of use each incident and dive into each incident on their own. So I want to kind of enable the user. So that's the goal, is to go forward and to develop narratives, to develop linkages with the sort of sources, the computer firm reports, to basically just unpack all this stuff and maybe become like a Wikipedia for computer network attacks. So that's the goal, is to basically be as transparent as possible to to figure these things out. And there, of course, could be errors here, and we need people to help, to do these things. Because right now, just me and my former grad students. But I think hopefully the DoD will give us a bunch of money soon. That's what I'm working on today. So I got to go home today and fix that grant to go forward with all this stuff.
No, please.
Oh, just one question, probably in a different realm, but there's very innovative corporations out there. Palo Alto, FireEye, Cyber, that have wonderful innovative things that they're doing. Does that figure, do you integrate that into your thesis at all? These companies that are coming up with these different ideas.
Yeah. No, not really, too. And that's one of the things I want to look at in the future, too, is how are capabilities connected to these sorts of organizations? Because some of them are very good. The problem I see, though, is a lot of them are just trying to kind of sell their wares.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, there are some great ones. I like Mandy and I like FireEye, which are obviously connected now, but there's other ones where I'm just, your people are just trying to get on the news, and that's the other thing too. It's weird working in this field because like the BBC will call me and they'll say we need a reply by 2 p.m. and I'll be in class till 2 and I get back and I'll call them and they go, oh yeah, we already got 5 quotes from computer security firms.
Of course.
And I'll just be like, do you think maybe they might have some bias there? Why are you just using computer security firms? Well, that scares me so much when you read all these cyber attack articles. They're all the quotes are from computer security firms. They don't go for a balanced response, which did lead them. The New York Times and the BBC talked about the greatest internet attack ever. They usually use those terms. And basically we found out later that there was no upspike in internet traffic, and there was no outage on Netflix. But when they just asked computer security firms for the quotes, they built it up as this greatest internet attack ever, and then you just think, oh God. But we need some education in the media. It doesn't happen. I wish it would. But yeah, some of those firms are great. We're going to deal with this as, like I mentioned, I'm developing this grant for the DoD to measure cyber capabilities. So we need to really think about that question, how to integrate these computer security firms into our measures of capabilities. I think that's something we'll do. So I have a grad student, a PhD student that's ready to go. So we just need some money. So.
Well, we all need education on cybersecurity. I think this book is probably a really good place for us to start. So thank you very much. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you so much for having me.